Welcome to LabMinutes.com and our lab video series in Cisco ISE 1.2. You can find a complete list of ISE video on our website by clicking on the link above and sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. This is our first video on ISE 1.2, so we are going to start off by going through some basic VMware installation. Although we already have an installation video on version 1.1, since the requirement has changed, especially with ISE 1.2 being 64-bit, I figure we'll do the new video for this. Plus, we are going to talk about deployment sizing and how we can spec out the VM as well. So what we're going to be doing this lab is install ISE 1.2 on our LM-ISE2 at the IPF.103 and VLAN 32. The majority of the prerequisites remains the same compared to the previous version. So at this point, you should have the ESXi install on your server. You should have also downloaded the ISE 1.2 ISO and either upload that to the ESXi data stores or write it to a DVD. You need to have a functioning DNS server, so for us here is a Windows 2008 machine with the IPF.40, and also have the A record configured that maps to the name to the IP. So here on our domain controller or DNS server, we bring up the DNS, and for our domain, we already have the LM-ISE2 configured pointing to the IPF32.103. Okay, and then you also need a functioning NTP server. For us, it's just going to be a switch one using the IPF.1 as well as the gateway IP, and that's reachable, which is our 32.1 also. Okay, then you need to make sure the virtualization technology or VT is enabled on your server, and the way to check that is either you console or SSH into your ESXi, which is exactly what I did here with SSH session, log in as root, and then execute a command called ESXCFG-info. If you press enter, you can see there's a whole lot of outputs. But what you are interested in is the HV support. So you can just grab it and look for HV. And here you can see that the HV support returns to 3. 3 is being supported by your server. It's also enabled. If it came back with 2, that means it's supported by the server, but it's disabled. And in which case you will have to go into your BIOS and turn on your VT, assuming your server support VT. Okay, so before we go ahead and start building VMs, you need to know how big the VM has to be, and that's kind of determined by the size of your deployment. So what I have up here is a Cisco documentation, and that's just the hardware installation guide for the ISE version 1.2, specifically under the network deployment in Cisco ISE. And if you follow this documentation, I mean, you can read through all this, but what I want to show you is towards the end here, there's a table for deployment sizing. And Cisco pretty much categorizes the size of deployment into 3 categories: small, medium, and large. And the main differences between each of these deployments is the maximum of endpoints supported, as well as the number of the required appliances or nodes within each of these deployments. So for example, in the small deployment, just 2 nodes with the primary and standby, combined persona, admin, monitoring, and policy service. For medium, you have dedicated admin and monitoring, 2 of those, and then policy service node. And for the large, you have dedicated admin, dedicated monitoring, and then up to 40 policy service nodes. So the way to kind of figure this out is to start from the right-hand column and basically choose your maximum number of endpoints that you want to support. And then from there, you can determine what's your admin and monitoring hardware is going to be. And then to support the required number of endpoints, you can pick and choose your policy service nodes right here, as long as the combined number of the policy service node that does not exceed the limits for the deployment that you choose. For example, for medium, you can only have up to 5 policy service, and for large, you have up to 40 policy service nodes. So for example, if you want to support up to 10,000 endpoints, then you can either go with medium or a small deployment. Although with a small deployment, you're going to need the biggest box you can get, which is the ISE 3495. Since we only use 2 boxes for the deployment. For medium, you're going to need at least minimum of 4 boxes, but at the same time, you can use the lower or less powerful server, which is 3395, although that's not so much relevant today because the 3315, 3355, and 3395 are pretty much end of sales, and everything today is now either 3415 and 3495. But you can still choose 3300 series for VMware sizing purposes, because you can pretty much configure VMware to replicate any hardware spec you like. Okay, and for the policy service nodes, you can pretty much pick and choose. So you can start off small and then keep adding them to scale out. But for the most part, you probably want to always deploy them in pair for failover purposes. Okay, so again, going back to our 10,000 endpoint example, you can just pick a pair of 3395, or for the actual physical hardware is 3495, or you can do a combination or multiple 3415 as well, as long as they all add up and give you the total of 10,000 endpoints. As you can see here for the virtual machine, it says any comparable to physical appliances, so you have that complete flexibility. You can build your VM to match whichever one of these appliances you like. And if we scroll further a little bit down, we also have a table dedicated for sizing inline posture node. Okay, so at this point you should know the number of ISE nodes you're going to need, and also the list of appliances or comparable appliances for each of those nodes. And if they are the physical hardware, those are what you're going to have to order. But for the VMs, now at least we have the specification for the VM, we can go ahead and look at how we're going to build those VMs. Now moving on to another link in the document, just right below it, there's installing release 1.2 software for the VMware virtual machine. So this page right here carries pretty much all the information that you need to build a VM for ISE 1.2. So let's go through that real quick, just scrolling down here. Let's just say here's the supported VM or ESXi version. And the VMware requirement, this is the minimum requirement, so that would be a single quad core, up to 32 gig of RAM, up to 2 terabyte of disk storage, and the type of the storage, the disk controller, and minimum of 1 network interface, although 2 or more is recommended. And the next section here is talking about the recommended VMware specification, and this where it carries over from our previous discussion as far as how you're going to build your VM to match the list of appliances you have selected as part of your design or deployment sizing. So here we have 3315, 3355, 3395, and the new UCSC series, the 3415 and 3495. You can see how it gets bigger as we progress to the right here with the 3495 has the most hardware requirement. Then separately we have also disk space requirements, and this is based on the node persona or what role the ISE node is going to play. So obviously you will need a bigger disk space if the node is, for example, a monitoring, because this is where the logging and reporting is going to be stored. You can see all of these can support up to 2 terabytes, and further down here there's also a table that translates combination of number endpoints and how many days you want to store your logs for into the size of your disk space. For our lab, we're going to assume that we're going to do a small deployment. So going back to the previous documentation right here, small deployment with up to 3,000 endpoints. So all we need is just, or actually right here, maximum of 2,000 endpoint rather. All we need is a 3315, and that can just be a 2-node small deployment. Going back to this table right here, to build an ISE 3315, you need a single quad core with 2.6 gig of CPU, total of 4 core, 4 gig of RAM, minimum of 500 gig of hard drive, and 4 integrated NIC. So with this information, we can go ahead and build our VM.